Okay. The Syracuse Board of Zoning Appeals meeting of February 22nd, 2024 is now in session. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from the January 11th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any modifications or discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 You approve the minutes?
Do you approve the minutes?
Yes.
It's okay. Yeah, okay. The minutes are officially adopted. The board will now conduct the public hearings on today's agenda. First, the applicant or the applicant's representative will state the reasons for the requested variance and present any material or documentation which is to be considered regarding the proposal. Next, persons wishing to speak in favor of the proposal will be given the opportunity to address the board. Then persons who wish to speak in opposition will be allowed to address the board. Finally, the applicant or a representative will be given the option to make any closing arguments or comments to the board. Following the public hearings this afternoon, the board may make a decision on each application heard. The board may also decide to hold this decision until the next public hearing. If the hearing is closed, no additional information will be allowed into the record except for the information the board may request. That information will now be available for public review at the zoning office in 1 Park Place, 300 South Salina Street. Staff will now introduce the first application.
Thank you. The first application is an area variance, V-23-18. This is at 216 North Lowell Ave. It's an area variance request to exceed the maximum height allowed of 50 feet for the installation of 2 steeples. The height would be approximately 130 feet for one and 70 feet tall. The property is situated in a R5 zone district.
Sure. I'm going to ask that we go to another, we start on another case, okay? And that's going to be the old business B2323.
Certainly.
Okay. So you want to read that off, or shall I? Or?
I can read it off. Give me a second. So that old business item is also an area variance. It's V-23-23. Project address is 301-11 East Taylor Street. This is an area variance to allow building 1 to exceed maximum allowable building length, to allow buildings 3 through 6 to deviate from the required height for ground floor dwelling units, and to allow buildings 3 through 6 to deviate from the required setback for ground floor dwelling units.
Well, I'm going to ask the applicant to come up. What I'm going to say is that we did receive some new information quite recently that we need to review more. The applicant is asked to review the new information. We will not be deliberating or voting on this today. The case, the application, the hearing was open when we left, and it will stay open, okay? And anybody who comes to the microphone, please state your name and address before you get going. Thank you.
Thank you. We're here to present some updates to the application, and we were made aware of the change to the agenda. We are still interested in hearing any feedback that you have to share. My name is Melanie Ray. I'm one of the architects representing the project from Hort Kolb and Macht for this development. We can, 636 South Lehigh Street, Baltimore, Maryland. And as the presentation slides are, nope. Got it. You don't have to show this one. It's actually the illustrated slides. Yep, those first few. Start on the first page. And so while this is coming up, in the last time we were here, we had presented a series of variance requests, again, for the accommodation of dwelling units on the ground floor of the multi-building development. as well as some requested relief from the setback requirements. Through conversations that we've had with the city planning staff, we have made some changes to the site plan to bring a select amount of buildings into full compliance, but also are still looking to pursue variances on other buildings. Yep, so you can start with this one. So as a part of that original application, for building 1, which is the dark gray building in the upper right-hand corner, I'll start with the variance as it relates to the dwelling units on the ground floor. Building 1 had always remained, or was in compliance at the time of that application. Through this site plan, you can see that the outlined buildings or edges outlined in red are where we have dwelling units at the ground floor. Building 1, we are showing that building in compliance by accommodating a setback of more than 9 feet. So that from East Adams Street, so that building was not in question at the time. Building 2, which is the middle gray building in the upper left-hand corner, that building did have ground floor units, or does have ground floor units on the first floor, and you'll see how we made an accommodation there to bring that building into full compliance. And then we have the 2-story townhomes that are along the new street to the south side that have a moderate setback for those units. So if you go to the next page. Again, I mentioned that we had received some feedback and had been working with city planning staff to provide a site plan that brings building 2 into compliance. So this building has shifted to accommodate the 9-foot setback that meets the exception for having dwelling units on the ground floor. So the variance request for that particular building has been removed. Once again, there is no variance request for the ground floor units on the building 1. And so at this point, the only request for relief is for the townhome units, of which those townhomes, the bedrooms are on the second floor. So there is no bedroom space on that first floor area. Really, this design accommodates for a minor setback from the right-of-way, creating a bit more of an urban condition for these 2-story townhomes as they transition to the lower scale of the building. So again, we're keeping a moderate setback off of the New Street to the south, Townsend Street to the east, and a more generous setback from State Street, with that being a more trafficked area. Next slide. You can go 2 more down. The second variance request is related to building 1 regarding the maximum building length being 180 feet. As was mentioned in the last application, the overall goal of this development is to maximize the number of affordable dwelling units. And so to accommodate that given the construction type, as well as the overall height of the building being limited to 4 stories, we're attempting to accommodate the number of dwelling units as needed to provide that 1-for-1 replacement of the existing units that are currently on the site. But we're achieving or using certain architectural techniques to break down the overall scale of the building from the overall building length, and creating segments of the building that appear to be within that 180-foot building length. So this includes building setbacks within the facade, changes in material, and changes in fenestration pattern as well. And so those are the adjustments that have been made to the application. Understand that today there will not be a decision made on that, but we appreciate the time to be able to present. And again, for the ground floor units, again, at the townhomes, the bedrooms are on the second floor of that space.
From the board?
Could you, I'm still not clear what changes were made for building 2 from the last time we were here.
Or if you go back up. So the building has moved about a little over 30 inches, both shifted south and east, to move the building further back from the right-of-way. So they, on either side of the building, it's more than 9 feet away from the property line.
So the elevation's not changed?
The elevation has not changed, correct. The building is approximately 6 inches above the adjacent sidewalk. The site is an extremely flat site, and so raising the building would either require a significant amount of fill to come into the site, or would require the addition of exterior ramps or steps, which would create a barrier, a physical barrier from being able to access. Right now, the rear of the building is completely accessible to the parking lot towards the back of the building.
So there were 2 ways to achieve compliance with what they were violating. So they set it back, which is one of the options to meet the requirement by code.
Okay. The other buildings, though, would still be out of compliance?
So that's correct. So the townhouses in particular, the townhomes, the dwelling units still exist on the first floor, but the difference between those and what they've changed with the setback by moving it back is that there are no bedrooms on the first floor. So although the dwelling unit exists in the townhomes, on a first floor space, it's unique and different from the rest of the buildings, which are now compliant by the setback that they've changed to, but the bedrooms are on the second floor. So, the concern with having a bedroom on a first story is not existent in these townhouses.
In these specific ones?
In these specific ones, right, all the bedrooms are on the second floor.
That's correct.
So the code says dwelling unit on the first floor. So the dwelling still exists there, but no bedrooms are on the first floor.
But that doesn't eliminate the need to.
That's
get
correct.
variance.
They still are in violation of that. So that they're still not compliant. It's still a violation, but the difference is all the bedrooms are moved up onto the second floor. The other buildings, when they weren't set back, had ground floor bedroom units on the first floor. So they've achieved that by pushing the setback back to be compliant by code. And then for the townhouses, the townhomes, the bedrooms are all on the second floor, but they are still not compliant with code.
So if they were to be fully compliant, what would that be like?
Either meeting, it'd be the same requirement that we just went through. So no ground floor units, so you'd have to set it back or have the elevation.
So the ground floor, the first floor would have to be elevated above the sidewalk, shall we say?
Yeah, that's correct. So the 2 options to be compliant, either the setback or the elevation would be applicable the same way they address the other building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody here who wishes to speak in favor of the application? Is there anybody here who wishes to speak against the application? Hearing none, we'll, as I said, we're going to keep the case open. We're not deliberating, and I guess we'll see you again, right? Thank you. Okay. Should I just go to that? You read it already into the record. Yeah, okay. The 216 North Lowell Avenue. Would the applicant please come up? Again, it's an area variance, and we're going to ask you to make a statement on it.
Good afternoon, Syracuse Zoning Board. Thank you for this opportunity today to present what we like to do with our parish, St. Pat, St. Bridget's Parish. We give you a little historical reference. Has been around for 154 years.
Please state your name and
Oh,
address.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. It's Father Kevin Maloney. I'm at 216 North Lowell Ave, right next door to the church. And our parish has been there for 154 years. I mean, is the anchor of the typical neighborhood. I'm sure people at Coleman's might disagree with that, but at the same point, we realized that our faith was there long before Coleman's was. But
You sure?
I think so. Yes, even Nibsy's even. But anyways, and what we were seeking to do is replace the steeples that were originally there over 100 years ago. The steeples were implemented onto the structure in 1890, and then about some 20, 30 years later, during a horrible windstorm, those steeples, especially the large one, came crashing down to the ground during Sunday Mass itself. At that point, it was the beginning of the Great Depression. The parish did not obviously have the funds to replace the steeple at that time. And then with the addition of school and other things going on at the parish, it was just never brought up or thought of or done. We're in a different position now in our history, and we would like to replace those steeples with newer steeples. And if it's all right with you, council, board members, I'd like to now invite up Patsy O'Brien and Chris White, who are our more structural and engineering part of this project, to speak in the parish on our behalf. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I'll echo Kevin's comments. So thank you. My name is Patrick J. O'Brien.
This?
Again, thank you for your time today. My name is Patrick J. O'Brien. I currently reside at 2350 Olanco Road in Marietta, New York, and I was born and raised at 320 Coleridge Avenue in Syracuse, New York. And my father owned the drugstore on Tipperary Hill with the green lights over the red. I was baptized and married in that church, as was my mother was baptized, married, and buried in that church. We have deep roots in the community, and we've always participated in our community around St. Pat's. I serve as a volunteer to the church on different things where I can help. One of the things is in construction management, from a little bit of my background, and some in financial management, again, from my background. I think, as Father Kevin stated, about 5 years ago, we started a pretty aggressive capital campaign to make improvements on a church that was deteriorating. Since that time, we have put a very large amount of money inside the church in the form of new paint, new floors, replacing the organ and things like that. We are currently moving along with our capital campaign, and we have the funds available to replace the steeple. So about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we started contacting construction managers, which is Chris White is a coordinator for us, and we have brought Del Paz Architects in. We talked to manufacturers about what would work, what wouldn't work, and we didn't have anything to show the city. And at one point, I contacted our counselor, Pat Hogan, saying, Pat, hey, listen, we have this plan. I'm sure the city's going to want to take a look at this. And so we started with Mr. Dishaw and found out what our requirements were. Ended up being, we certainly had to come in and get a variance because we were exceeding a height variant. I think what we're looking for is a height variance. And we're replacing the steeples. They were designed to be at about the same height as the original steeples. They're going to be much lighter, and we are going to engineer them so that they don't blow over again. Let's take a step backwards. There's the old ones. As you can see, they're a little ominous, but the architecture at the time was Gothic, and but it blew over, so somebody missed it somewhere. And so that is the drawing and the profile of what the city asked us to provide to show context. On the left is what we have, and on the right is what we're proposing. Just another view of it. It is about the same height as the old one. The smaller steeple on the left is taller than the old one, but the architects thought they needed that for balance. There's structural work that needs to be done, and then the actual setting of the steeples is relatively straightforward. It comes in pieces. It gets put together, and they lift it up with a crane and set it on site. That's pretty much what we're asking for, is permission to exceed. We're asking for a variance to exceed the acceptable height limit. However, we do want to remind we are replacing steeples that were built originally, and we are at approximately the same height as they were originally. I don't know if that means anything, but I don't think we're looking for something bigger. Obviously, you can see the design on our what we like to call neo-Gothic is much thinner, not quite as ominous looking. And this was voted on by the parish, the architects, the engineers, after many, many looks. And until we got this far, we couldn't even bring it to the city to say what we wanted, because there's a lot of other people that say besides us. I'm sure I'm forgetting a million things.
Now, does that steeple have a bell? Is there a bell in there?
There will be. There's a bell system in the church now that's broke. You know, we're going to fix this part of what we're going to do. We're going to fix that too. Again, I'll defer to Chris, who's a detail guy, if anybody has any construction details or questions or, you know.
If
Chris, why
you're
don't you-
able to add some detail, that'd be fine.
You know, I'll let Chris introduce himself. And
Chris White, I live at 2373 Route 174, Marietta, New York, 13110. I've done several projects with the church before. I'm a construction management, construction consultant guy. And we started looking at this, and I can give you just some technical stuff. The brick structure, which is existing and we're not touching it, that is about 70 feet tall. The structure we're putting on top is a prefabricated lightweight aluminum structure. Modern building codes require fairly large wind loading, and we're putting this on top of a 154-year-old wood structure. So there was a little bit of a challenge to get it structurally sound. The design, we 3D cloud scanned the existing foundations and everything else to make sure that was work. One of the reasons why we chose this type of structure is it's very lightweight. So clearly the first one fell over. We didn't want to duplicate that. Couple important points. The zoning regulation is 50 feet. We are going a fair bit above that, but not in any habitable space. There was a question about the bell. I don't know if there was a bell there ever, but there was an electronic bell system put in there probably 60, 70 years ago. It hasn't worked forever. We are going to refurbish that and replace the electronic bell system, but we also found in a neighboring church a church bell that was cast about the same year this church was built. So we're going to put that, but it's going to be inside the brick part of the structure just for structural reasons. It's completely unconditioned space up there. Really at this point, no electricity, heat, or anything else out, no habitable space. Any technical questions?
You know exactly how tall the original ones were?
The only thing in existence, can you flick back a couple?
That photo is all you have.
That's it. There's no prints from the original
To me,
church.
it looks like it looks taller than what you're proposing.
It does to me too.
When we first thought about this project and they asked me, when we found this picture, everybody looked at it and just went, no, that doesn't look right.
Does look like it'd blow over.
Yes, well, it did.
Yeah, right.
And I met with Del Pos and we looked at it and they also kind of shrugged their shoulders going, don't know what they were thinking.
we sort of scaled it too, right, Chris?
Yeah.
We're within, we think, 5 feet.
I mean, we know how tall the brick structure is, so we can estimate it was about 135 feet to the top. And that's kind of where we went. We actually, some initial drawings had it a little taller, and we said that didn't look right either, so we brought it back down to the same height. The shorter spire, when they did the quick fix repair of the tall one, they also took the short one off and put a little stumpy pyramid on that too. So you can see the shorter one is taller than this. We're going to kind of replicate the height, but not the feel.
Can we go back to the original picture, or the existing picture, I'm sorry? Can you see the temporary roofs that were put on there? Those are actually just wood framed. You know, and the same thing on the other side.
Yeah.
To answer one other question, the bell tower is here.
And it will stay there.
It will stay there. And as we're doing structural work to ensure that we never have to worry about it again, that will all be part of it, working from the top down.
Other questions from the board? Hearing none.
By
Yes,
the way,
you got
just-
something to say?
Just an interesting comment. I have climbed up this steeple now probably 15 times, doing surveying and all that. That's a temporary structure. That pyramid has been there 100 years. It's actually fairly sound, but you can see by how it was made, it was really just a patch to cover where the other steeple was. I think they've been pretty lucky that that's existed for 100 years the way it was put together.
It was 1925 when the hurricane, when the windstorm hit. 1925, which I know is not exactly a flush time in our country, and as the next generation didn't have the time or wherewithal, as Father said, the school was being built, and so over the last few years, the next generation's stepping up, and we're making these improvements to anchor our community, Tipperary Hill, west end of Syracuse, make it more beautiful, make it more welcoming.
Made it through the 25 storm, it would have been hit by that State Fair Labor Day storm, and it would have done it.
The Labor Day storm, yeah.
Anybody here wish to speak in favor of the application? Please step up and state your name and address, and I know who you are.
Excuse me, my name is Janice McKenna. I am at 110 South Lowell Avenue. I live there, and I also own an advertising agency that operates out of that location. I'm a parishioner, business owner, neighbor, and I'm also Coleman's advertising agency. So, Father, thank you for the little plug. Is this being recorded? Yes, the church is older than Coleman's, and it is the heartbeat of the neighborhood. I'm also president of the Tipperary Hill Neighborhood Association, have been for 20 years. Now, we have not been able to show this to the neighborhood, but that's just because of timing situations, so I can't speak for the neighborhood, but I can tell you, as the president of the Tipperary Hill Neighborhood Association, what an asset St. Pat's is to our community. They are a neighbor that participates, a neighbor that cares. Many days you'll see a father out there working in his flower garden. He's all about beautification. And I've only lived on Tipperary Hill for 35 years, so I'm a relative newbie. But I always felt that there was something missing from that church. I really did. I would look at it and say, that's not right from a design standpoint, and now I see why. So I think this is beautiful, and I think it'll add a lot more to the character of our neighborhood.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else want to speak? Yes, Counselor.
I'm Pat Hogan. I'm a parishioner at St. Pat's. I'm also the usher at the 8 o'clock Mass, if anyone wants to attend. I'm a city councilor, too, and I've represented this neighborhood for a lot of years.
Give us an address, please.
212 Bryan Avenue. I just want to say, and Janice alluded to this, what kind of a community resource. It's a community of faith and hope, and it's proven by the undertaking of the renovation of the school. When the diocese closed the school, we turned it into apartments, only with the provision that our CYO programs and our Leprechaun League could still participate with the gym. We've done a lot of things with St. Pat's has an extensive food pantry that's up there on Avery Avenue, and it feeds not only the folks that need help like that, but also a significant amount of Ukrainian refugees that have come to this country too. So St. Pat's is not only a place of faith and hope and an institution, but it's also a tremendous community resource. So I, of course, in favor of this.
Anybody else wish to speak in favor of the application?
Say a couple words other than echoing. I'm Nick Masterpole. I'm a business owner. I'm also the finance chairman at the church. My address across the street, 1524 West Fayette Street. As the finance chairman, I say we have a very active, generous, parish. We did a capital campaign, which we wanted to do the interior renovations starting just pre-pandemic, probably 2019. And we set a goal. We've far exceeded our goal of fundraising. Part of the reason why we want to continue putting back into the church and continuing to improvements because we have the funds to do so, and we're given these funds by parishioners to beautify the church and to keep it up, and that's what we're kind of continuing to do as a committee, as a finance committee, and as a parish. This is what the parishioners want. They want us to continue to keep the church and to keep it a staple in Tipperary Hill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody want to speak against the application? Hearing none, I'll close the case and I'll ask if there is a motion on this variance application. What do you mean? Is there a motion? Oh, we need to do seeker before the motion, or do we do the motion and then ask that person to do the seeker?
You have to do the seeker before you take an action. I can walk you through it.
Okay,
I assume that you're all familiar with the questions in Part 2 of the short form EAF.
Yes.
And have you reviewed the Part 1 EAF that's included in your packet for this
Yes.
application? Okay. Does anybody find that there are any moderate to large impacts under seeker for this project?
No.
Okay, hearing none, then I recommend that you move to declare a negative declaration and complete the Part 3 of the EAF accordingly.
The only thing is, on the seeker, they marked suburban instead of urban on their location. Is that a big deal?
That's fine, no.
do we need a motion?
You need a motion on the neg deck and the seeker.
Is there a motion to,
I'll make a motion to negative seeker.
You'll make a motion for a negative declaration under
Yes.
seeker?
I'll
And
second the motion.
all those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
I think we're unanimous on that. A new process, and I think it's best that we go to you
Sure.
every time. Makes sense. Okay, now I can say, is there a motion on the variance?
I'll make a motion, we approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mike, can you give us your rationale?
Okay. the-
Findings of fact.
I'm sorry?
The findings of fact.
Well, whether there would be.
I'm not a lawyer.
Whether there would be an undesirable change to the neighborhood or detriment, I would say no. Whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method, well, it's highly unlikely, because if they want to make a steeple, you're not gonna, there's only one way, and it's up. Whether the requested variance is substantial, considering the size of the building and the small space that it really is involved, it's, that would be, the answer to that would be no. The proposed variance, whether the proposed variance would have an adverse effect or in the neighborhood or physical conditions, I would say no. And is the alleged difficulty self-created? I would say not, because it was caused by what they were replacing, a steeple that was knocked down during a windstorm, which obviously they had no control over.
What did you second? Do you have anything to add?
I just, that as Mike outlined, considering all of those factors, the area variance criteria, it appears in Mike's, in my opinion, that this will not have a negative impact on the neighborhood, and that the proposed variance, in fact, will have a positive condition outweighing the other factors we take into consideration.
Anybody else have any comment, discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the variance, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay. So that's all set. Go to our next case. Oh, we're having a mass exodus.
A mass exodus?
Yes.
A mass exodus.
A mass exodus. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I get it.
Thank you.
Give me a minute.
Just gonna let it quiet down a little bit before I introduce you. All right, next item on the agenda is also a use variance. This is V-24-00. It's a variance to allow for ground floor dwelling units in an existing structure located at 420-30 East Genesee Street. Zone district is MX5. Oh, and actually, before I turn it over to the applicant, council would like to add something to the introduction of this item.
Board members, I just want to draw your attention to the staff report, which I'm sure you've already reviewed, but if it's been a while, please take a minute to go through that again, particularly the pros and cons. This is the first use variance you've done since we've done some more extensive training. And I want to remind you of a few things. Obviously, the 4 criteria for use variance are whether the applicant's able to obtain a reasonable return, whether the hardship is self-created, whether the changes proposed are in harmony with the neighborhood, and whether there are unique circumstances. And remind you that unique circumstances can include existing buildings. And so please note the constraints that they have on this application. I'm not asking you to deliberate in a certain way. I'm just trying to point out the salient issues related to the use variance criteria.
Are those criteria in our packet?
They are not. I can state them to you again.
Okay,
but,
well,
You said 1, able to obtain reasonable return. What was, and then 3 was in harmony with neighborhood. 4
So the 4
was
use
unique
variance
circumstance.
criteria set by the legislature that's in the general municipal law are whether the applicant is able to obtain a reasonable return without the requested variance, whether the applicant presents any unique circumstances related to the land, but that can include the structures on the land. It's not limited to the dirt, okay? Whether the proposed object of the use variance will be in harmony with the neighborhood, and whether the hardship was self-created. So those are the 4 factors that they have to demonstrate to you and that you will make findings on. But again, please make sure you have reviewed the staff report thoroughly.
I'll also point out, if you look at page 74 of your packet, all those are listed there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to have that in front of us. Okay? Ready to go?
Perfect. So good afternoon. My name is Brian Bouchard. I'm with CHA Consulting. So I'm the project engineer working on behalf of the applicant, 300 South State Street, Syracuse. And the applicant, Phil Gardner, is also with us to answer any questions that I can't. Third avenue you could take to refer to those 4 standards of proof for the use variance would be our cover letter, but I'm going to walk you through some of that in just a minute. So just a comment first, you know, I've been doing project engineering work for about 17 years now, both across the country, but Syracuse being my home office, spent a lot of time with this board, right, and the Planning Commission. So it's kind of interesting in that all of the projects that we've done together in the past were kind of focused on variances that were needed because we were under this old antiquated zoning ordinance, right? Seems like almost every modern project that we came before you with needed some type of variance, whether it was lot coverage or setback or height, because it really didn't fit sort of the confines of that existing zoning, which was to develop a city. It was really to start redeveloping a city in a modern way, particularly to bring, you know, housing options back from the suburbs back into the city and the downtown area. So this is actually my first time applying to the BZA under sort of the rezone Syracuse regulations. And what I kind of noticed in going through the application is that it's a little different where instead of relating to sort of some outdated zoning ordinances, what I think that I found and what you've probably found with some of these new applications under rezone is more or less interpretation of some of the fine print and how you could really interpret the new zoning ordinance, which was obviously a massive undertaking, but just like any tax law or healthcare law or any type of legislation, there's always at some point a uniqueness that provides a test to that ordinance. And so starting at the end, basically, as staff has memorialized for you, this application is really to request a use variance from the MX5 regulations, which is to allow this project to construct residential units on the ground floor of these existing buildings. So I'll take you through a little bit of history with like the site, the project location, and then I will actually elaborate on those standards of proof and how we feel that we've justified the approval of this variance based on the unique circumstance that we have here. So what's shown up on the site, this is fine for now. This is the existing survey. So the site is currently 2 parcels, 430 and 420 Genesee Street, and under a separate application, we are proposing to combine these 2 parcels into one contiguous parcel to facilitate the redevelopment here. So to the north of this page, which is actually planned north, is East Genesee Street. We're right near the intersection of South State Street, which is only about a block from where we're standing at City Hall. This project is directly south to the top end of the page is actually, if you're familiar with the Syracuse Firefighters Memorial Park, which essentially spans the 400 block of Genesee Street here. Just to our right is the County Sheriff's Office. And then to the bottom of the page, we have the one-way McCarthy Ave, which is a right-of-way just off to the rear of the project here. You could just flip to the site plan. So the project, these are some just some photos of the site. I'm sure you're familiar with it. You can go right to the site plan there. So the scope of the project is interior renovations only to create the new residential apartment units. So there's no building additions, there's no exterior alterations, and there's no building demolition that's involved with this. So the site plan is really limited to reconfiguring and organizing the surface parking area. There's a little bit of double parked issue, and you can see between the 2 buildings, there's a very narrow alleyway that currently serves as the egress from the site. And it's really a blind spot between these 2 buildings to get you back out onto Genesee Street. So we'll actually be closing that and providing an egress point to McCarthy, which is going to facilitate our emergency access in terms of fire trucks being able to get into this site, emergency response vehicles, and it's going to create more of a pedestrian-friendly walkway between those 2 buildings and kind of serve as a mitigation measure for the pedestrian traffic along Genesee Street there. You just go to the elevation view of 420. So this is 420 East Genesee Street. One of the main focuses of this project that I'll talk about is really the historic preservation component. So in our cover letter, the introduction describes what the historic value of each of these structures is and why it's important to this project. 420 is a existing two-story steel frame building. It was built in 1956, and it was designed by one of our local prominent architects, King & King. This is actually one of their first and earliest commissions in what's considered the international style. And it was also served as their own office building between the 1950s and the 1960s. This building has been nominated as eligible by the State Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service to be on the Registry of National Historic Places, based specifically on the historic window volume that you see, the cladding, and the overall appearance of the building. You could go to just the elevation of 430 if you could. There's also a cool mural that we intend on keeping on the side of that building if you're familiar with it. So this is 430 East Genesee Street, a little bit more ornate and a little bit older. This is actually the former Boys Club of Syracuse. It was designed by Melvin King. This is 1922, and it was a purpose-built clubhouse for the local boys chapter here in Syracuse. So it's a 5-story building designed in the collegiate Gothic style. And it actually operated as the Boys Club until about the 1980s when it was converted to a law office. And this has also been nominated to the National Historic Places Registry. So specifically, and you can just leave it here, specifically our request is a use variance. And the code sections I'll cite state that in all MX districts except for MX5, dwelling units are allowed on the ground floor. So obviously we're in MX5, that's why we're requesting relief. And then a related point is that all residential developments exceeding 30,000 square feet of floor area shall have at least one first floor commercial use. So as I mentioned, we did provide a cover letter with our papers that we filed with the application, specifically to address the justifications as to why we're allowing this or why we're requesting this, and how this is a particular circumstance that we can prove to you is essentially unique and would not otherwise, in terms of the balancing test, be applicable or otherwise apply at large to the MX5 district. The first is our location. So our location we feel is unique. The project is not necessarily, and each building individually is not necessarily surrounded by or abutting, very established business commercial corridors. And what I picture here is some of the areas that we have along South Salina Street or Armory Square, or when you get over on the east side of 81 with the East Genesee Regents Association Business Corridor, where a use variance in those instances, where you would be requesting a ground floor residential unit. When you're in like Armory Square, you'd have a restaurant on one side, a developer coming to you with an abutting space that they want a ground floor residential unit, and then you have another bar or restaurant on the other side. So there are uniqueness in terms of the location where our buildings somewhat stand alone. And we're also kind of in this transition area where you get sort of out of downtown and you're kind of traversing over toward 81 where you start to enter the business districts that are at the south side of the university as well. Location for us in terms of the residential use is also directly related sort of to the open space and part of the attractiveness of sort of having that Syracuse Firemen's Memorial Park right outside of our front door. It's one of the biggest open green spaces that are kind of in downtown proper, so it would certainly be an amenity for the residents to use that existing green space. So the location is unique. The other thing that we went through is with respect to the fact that this has proven to be unviable commercial space. 430 East Genesee Street, the Boys Club, has been vacant commercial and office space for nearly 10 years. So 420 has been also vacant for several years. So if they were marketable as viable commercial space, they would have already been filled. Part of the reason for this is because that these are existing old buildings, and there is an overstock currently within the market of modern, larger office spaces that are directly surrounding this area. My building is almost adjacent to this at the head end of the Syracuse. It's One Park Place. And we moved in about 5 years ago, and there were many floors of that. It's actually the biggest floor plate of office space, or one of the biggest floor plates of office space in downtown, and several floors have been vacant, obviously, until a point last year when City Hall Commons moved a lot of their offices into that space, so it's becoming fuller. But even if this space was modern or new, you can also see that it's much smaller in size, right? Especially if we consider only just that first floor. It really wouldn't be able to compete with any of these available spaces that are on the market today, both because they're too small, they would garner lower rents, and it would really be catering to more of a niche style tenant with that type of smaller space. So that's justification that we use as well. The buildings themselves are small, so in terms of unit count, we have 21 units in one building and 36 in the other. So a loss of units in terms of the entire first floor would be very substantial for these smaller historic buildings. This is kind of completely different than if some of the projects we've worked on where you have a residential building, multi-story, that has 75, 100, 150 residential units in them. Those buildings' residential units can support the rent for having commercial space or amenity space or common space on the ground floors. So those larger buildings are certainly in a better financial position as well. And then secondly, I kind of mentioned it, but newer construction, right? When we are proposing a new project, you can self-impose the design of the building to accommodate that space, whereas we really can't based on the historic architecture that we have here. The applicant themselves, one of the examples that I want to give is that they are familiar with this dilemma of the commercial space. And as you might recall, the Treasury Building at 101 South Salina Street, it's probably the most famous historic bank in our area, and it is right on South Salina Street. They completed a massive renovation of that project, and it was very successful, but it does still have vacant commercial space on the first floor, just to use that as an example. So we have the location, kind of the unviable commercial aspect. With respect to the historic, size, shape, and layout, most modern commercial spaces on the first floor, for instance, require appropriate ceiling heights. The standard is typically 14 feet. We have a very gracious ceiling height in here today, and you can imagine that if that ceiling height comes down, you have kind of this unmarketable space. Our buildings, neither of them have any type of real reasonable clear space. 420, which is the smaller building, is about 8 feet as you enter the building, and there's areas within the first floor that get to about 9 or 10 feet, but certainly smaller than what the market demands for commercial space. 430 is a little bit taller. It's 11'6", still doesn't really meet what a lot of clients would need for commercial space, But I want to point out that 430, what we're calling the first floor is actually recessed below the street level. So you walk in, there's actually a flight of stairs that takes you down to what's considered the first floor. So that could be open for interpretation as well. But obviously, that is not marketable to a commercial tenant, to be down sort of in a half-submerged first floor or basement. And then also the windows that you can see really don't give any glazing or visibility to any type of commercial tenant either. We went through one of the most important tests in a use variance is really the financing and reasonable rate of return, and we've provided you with a lot of financial data that I'll just summarize here. The bottom line is that this project very much cannot realize a reasonable rate of return without approval to construct the ground floor units. Essentially, the project is unfinanceable if we were to have to include that ground floor space, and this is for a variety of reasons that we outline. The drag of low rents on the NOI or net operating income is one of them, just based on the unmarketability of the space that we have. So other projects, to give you a very basic example of this financial analysis, what we're seeing in the market today is a difference between almost 35 square foot annually for residential space versus 15 square feet for commercial space. So you can garner almost more than double the rent from residential space. And with a project that we have combining only 50 units, a loss of more than 25% of those units would certainly create a financial hardship. What this doesn't include is obviously the fact that a lot of commercial tenants expect the landlord to actually pay to fit out that space. And if that's $20,000 or $30,000, it can also set back the payback period for that commercial tenant by 2 or 3 years. One of the very important things, this project has applied for historic tax credits, which is really why the reason that we're here today asking for this, because the project financing strictly for the historic tax credits to be given strictly prohibits exterior alterations to sort of the historic fabric of what the project has been eligible for. In both cases, both of these buildings have been renovated numerous times on the interior, but they've qualified specifically for the tax credits based on the historic facades. So this allows us to change no openings, no new entryways or storefront windows for commercial spaces, vestibules, or things that would accommodate 2 separate entrances for ADA compliance for things like commercial space. That would obviously disqualify us from those tax credits, which helps to fill a gap. So we give you the financial data here, and you can see at the bottom of the page, even with a cap rate of 6.5%, the value of the project comes out to be $15 million versus a project cost of $30 million. So this is not a questionable area. It's not a gray area. It's a very substantial gap. And the only way to fill that gap is for the project as proposed to be viable with the ground floor units. So we'd receive the historic tax credits, which are very substantial. We'd garner a slightly higher income by having those ground floor units. And most importantly, which is really the crux of the whole financial viability, is that we'd be able to receive HUD financing. We can't qualify for HUD financing unless we have greater than 75% residential use within the building. So those were essentially your 4 tests that you have to prove. So we went through reasonable rate of return, which is really dependent on the dollar.
HUD financing are you using?
HUD financing.
Which HUD financing?
That's a good question. Okay.
So I guess it would be helpful to know more about that relative to your assertion about 75%.
Okay, sure. So reasonable rate of return is one of the tests. So aside from maybe the difference in HUD financing, obviously the historic tax credits fill almost an $8 million gap. So even if there was different funding mechanisms that Honora has mentioned, the gap is truly the historic preservation and not being able to modify that building to satisfy any commercial clients. The unique hardship, I think, as staff had said, the historic building with preservation requirements on top of sort of the unique geometry and layout that exists that we're fitting into is certainly unique compared to other properties in MX5. We went through the character of the area in terms of the open space that's adjacent and sort of not diminishing the character of what is already an established business corridor. And then that the hardship is not self-created. So things like the saturation of the commercial market is not self-created. The layout, the age, the location of the building is not self-created. And I want to remind the board that this is different from an area variance, where you can test these balancing acts and find that perhaps one of them does not meet the test. In a use variance, we have answered to the affirmative that each one of these is applicable to this project, which is required for you to approve the project. So we went through this a little bit with staff in terms of use variance. The residential is a use, but I also want to kind of couch this in a way that a classical use variance example would be a restaurant is allowed in a business neighborhood, but you know, or a bank or something, but you want to add a drive-through. The drive-through is not allowed, and the zoning contemplated why a drive-through is not allowed because it has impacts that are not compatible with a neighborhood business, right? So this is a very hard test to balance when you look at the aspects of having like a meat packing facility in the middle of a single family neighborhood. That would be a use variance because it varies from the uses that are allowed in the district. This we feel is a slightly lower bar because the residential use is allowed. It is compatible, it is allowed on the property, and what we're deviating from is really the location of those units, not necessarily the compatibility of the use. So for those reasons, you know, we feel that this application in your test, which is really to prove that the benefit that's sought by the applicant to successfully redevelop these properties in this project that's been sat vacant for so many years, the benefits that we seek to construct these ground floor residential units certainly outweigh any identifiable harm or detriment to sort of the surrounding area, of which we have identified none and none have been brought to our attention by staff. So with that, Bill and I can answer any questions that you might have.
Questions from the board?
There's a new construction next door on the east, is that right?
There is, yes.
Is there residential on the first floor there?
I did not work on that project, but I knew that question would come up, and I believe that there is, because they were able to construct the space, that I believe that they do have some commercial space. It might be a cafe or something like that.
There is a cafe.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lobby. I'm not sure there's residential on the first floor.
Right, there probably isn't, right? Again, be a new construction. That's,
And they got by.
It wasn't new construction. That building was there.
It looked, I guess, from the outside that way.
You
Yeah.
did a nice job.
Not historic.
Now, if you put apartments in these buildings, will these windows open, or because like at 430?
yeah, I mean, so there'll be
420 is all-
privacy screening from the interior, because again, we have to leave the exterior the way that it is, but the way that the floor plan's set up, almost all of the units, except for I think one, have positioned the bedrooms at least away. So the living space and the active space would sort of be what would be facing the front. Obviously, 430 is a lot different because they have very small windows and they're partially recessed. So in terms of privacy, we feel that the
But
projects.
I mean, they would open for air or no? Like,
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, there's venting requirements for everything from the bathroom areas to the kitchen areas to the changeover air and living spaces that the buildings are basically gutted right now. So we have a lot of opportunity on the interior to bring up energy efficiency and code compliance. It's just the exterior that we can't modify.
Could I ask staff for some help realizing all the different uses that could be in that space? For instance, would a restaurant be allowed?
I don't know about that, but I think the point that Brian's trying to make and that staff tried to make in the staff report and as well stated in his letter is that they're constrained by the historic nature and what can and can't happen with the building. And what I think they were saying and in our discussions was that the financial constraint of trying to put commercial uses juxtaposed with the need for housing in the city sort of makes this the only use possible for that location.
I also understood that if he messes with the facade or the outside of the building, he will get his head.
They can't
his
touch it.
HUD.
Yeah.
um,
So the HUD financing is for housing,
Yeah.
and that's the financing they were able to get.
Yeah, and the historic tax credits are obviously specific to not altering any of the historic fabric. So that's what I was mentioning, right?
And it's kind of what I was going to ask. Is the point that there are no It doesn't matter what the list of commercial uses are, none of them will fit there. We need the
Not
housing there.
at this property at that location
Yeah.
with the HUD financing.
Obviously,
If
there's.
they had other financing, maybe, but this is what they have. That's what they're presenting.
Yeah, and to Mike's point, there is a very wide range of uses that are allowed. Some would be even worse, right? Like a restaurant and retrofitting a restaurant or a bar or something in this is not the appropriate space. But, you know, even with office space, you still have to compete financially with other office space and the size of the space and things. So there's a wide palette that would be allowed. Some of them would be, you know, different than others in terms of compatibility, but it's really the financial component because the residential is important for the financing here.
Other questions?
Is this a all four test, or is it a one is sufficient? It's all four.
All four.
I mean, I do think the point Mike made, I was thinking the same way, but in a more direct way, which is you're saying you can't have a reasonable return, but the building immediately adjacent appears similar, had a recent residential conversion, and has ground floor retail, and it's in the connective corridor. So it's a key corridor, and some of the things you outline in your own approach, it like One Park Place being a huge office, commercial tenant, like I think the idea is to have urban vitality at the street level, and that's what makes it like a desirable place. And I walked it an hour before this meeting, and I do think that other conversion is nicer with the commercial space. And I almost feel like and that proves that you can have commercial space on that street, which I think the goal would be to have more, so that one cafe isn't an island. And I'm afraid that this type of variance might actually make it harder to sustain that one commercial activity. And it's like a key, it's really in the downtown, but there's so much new development that can happen there that you do need the street vitality. So, I mean, the one thing that I think the sunken basement thing, but then in downtowns, there's lots of successful commercial spaces that are sunk down.
There's a restaurant on Clinton Square that is below ground level.
Yeah.
The steakhouse. So I guess the question is, and I agree with what you're saying, or do we want to keep the properties vacant or wait for that?
Yeah, I think
perfect
that
design?
I want to counsel the board also that the hardship, financial or ability to obtain a reasonable return criteria isn't about could there be other uses, but can they get a reasonable return if there was another use? I think your point is really well taken, that you could have a vital corridor if there was more commercial uses on the ground floor. But what you're looking at right now is, would it be viable at that location necessarily? And not whether it would be more desirable, right? This is about the numbers, but viable, financially viable.
It's definitely not what rezone had hoped for in the changes, but we have to take the situation as it is.
Yeah, the difference is really understanding what rezone's intent was versus the unique characteristics of this project with the historic requirements, the costs of the project versus retrofitting something that's not historic, and how this is perhaps different than the corner lot.
I think, Brian, there are a number of uses, though, outlined in MX5 that wouldn't require alterations to the exterior of the building, so you'd still qualify for the historic tax credits. I'm thinking office space, there's daycare, there's...
Right.
So, understanding that the historic tax credits are a critical component of the capital stack, absolutely, but I think what Tim and I are saying is there are uses that would not require exterior alterations.
Yes.
And candidly, it'd be doing a real bad job at my day job if I granted the premise that we can't fill commercial spaces downtown. So.
Right. I think part of our financial status wasn't just the tax credit, but it's also the fact that the first floor occupies such a large space because the buildings are small. And yes, office space may fit there as sort of a smaller office space, but the rent that it garners does not pass the test of the financial performance of the project.
I'm looking, and I'm not seeing a comparison of I see the financials you provided, but not a comparison.
Well, I guess the comparison would be a right side up project, right? So
I mean, nothing's right side up in the city, so.
Right, yeah.
Building vacant now?
They've completely vacant, yeah.
For how long?
430's been vacant for 10 years and 420's been vacant for several years, 3 years, 3 years.
I mean, I've been in both these buildings. I understand. What are you doing with the pool? Very curious, but
So the pool, as part of, so that is one interior historic component that needs to be maintained. So the apron of the pool will still exist, and the pool is currently built over with a subframe floor, and that'll remain as the tenant amenity space within the back portion of that building.
What's your, if you'd like to talk, you have to get up there and say your name and address, and you are welcome to do that.
Thanks for having me. Phil Gardner with Douglas Development. We are Philip Gardner with Douglas Development. We are the owners of 430 and 420.
And your address, please?
My address is 655 New York Avenue in Washington, D.C. So that's our business address. But to your point, actually, exterior fenestration and exterior modifications, existing exterior conditions are obviously critical to the tax credit and a major component of why we're choosing this use and pursuing the tax credits, but also those that are familiar with tax credits, core components of the interior building, components that are part of the original core circulation of the building. And in this building, 430 in particular, the pool takes up more than I'm spitballing, but at least a third of the first floor plate as it is right now has to be retained as it is. And whether that were residential or commercial space, you're going to have a third of the floor as a pool that could not be touched. A swimming pool.
Yeah, it's a boys' club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the boys club, the boys club used to have a pool. There was a basketball court. There was an auditorium.
So we're already dealing with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's been vacant for all these years, and just what's your evaluation why it's been vacant all these years?
I think because of what I described in terms of this space, even as commercial space, if it was desirable for the city and the corridor to have commercial space, nobody's wanted to occupy it. So we believe that even though there is a palette of uses that are allowed to go in that space, that really these buildings will remain vacant unless it's allowed to be redeveloped as a residential project.
Are you in contract for this, or do you own it now?
We own the property. Yeah. We closed on it, I would say, 2 years ago at this point. We've been in design, iterative design, financing, modeling, trying to figure out how to make this thing work for quite some time. At the time when we kind of acquired it, we were in the throes of our work at 101 South Salina, which has been tremendous and tremendously successful for us, and that's why we acquired this. We couldn't be prouder of what we've done there, and we're happy to be there. It's 94% occupied as of this morning in terms of the residential, 0% occupied on the first floor in terms of the commercial space. In fact, the former Onondaga Bank space at the corner, we took upon ourselves to convert into a event space that we own and operate because we couldn't. Obviously, there's no large format bank users that would use a purpose-built bank. So
is the core of your business residential living?
A good bit of it at this point has been that way. Where we operate in, I would say, across the spectrum, aside from healthcare and large arena. We don't do things like that, but we specialize in a high volume of adaptive reuse historic residential buildings. We do a lot of it. The Treasury at 101 South Salina is a prime example of that. We have a number of products in buildings in Buffalo, all up and down the eastern seaboard and mid-Atlantic, and primarily in Washington, D.C.
Other questions from the board?
what's the square footage of the first floor of 420? 430 rather? And it's 4 residential units down there?
I believe there's 5. 1, 2, 5. No, you're right. There's 4.
There's 4.
Yeah, a 2-bedroom in the back.
So first floor is about, the floor plate is 6,600 square feet, but 1,500 square feet of it is that pool.
I'm actually using that in your favor on this one, because
Yeah.
then that's less leasable space for you.
Right, I think the leasable space is like 3,800.
What floor is the pool on? Is it in this, the pool is on what level?
The first floor.
First
It's
floor.
wild. So part of what makes it both awesome and unique from a historic tax credit perspective and so difficult from a commercial perspective is that the geometries of these older buildings are so atypical, and the structure is atypical when it comes to modern commercial, or at least marketable commercial space that you see in the rest of the corridor. So you've got varying ceiling heights. There are additions added to this building at certain times that have created, deeper structural beam pockets. You have girders that are supporting a fifth floor where you've got bizarre ceiling heights. And some of these first floor apartments here on the bottom of the screen, in the blue there, are going to have challenged ceiling heights because when they added the fifth floor, they have a steel girder that was reinforced. It wouldn't be a beautiful wide open space like this that someone would typically want to.
It'll be unique.
Extremely unique. Extremely unique.
Are you going to add any windows to the new building? I know on one side there are no windows at all.
So there are places where the windows have been infilled from their historic context, and those windows will be added back or replaced in certain areas along
That's the older building?
Yes.
What about the newer building?
Newer building stays the
No,
same.
it stays
Yeah.
exactly.
Questions? Questions? Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Is
it.
there anybody who wishes to speak in favor of the application? Is there anybody? Yes. Sorry.
Steve Case, 155 Xavier Circle. I'm actually here for another project, but I thought we were going first, so I already missed my 2 o'clock meeting, so I feel compelled to speak.
I'm
So we
also
do-
missing a 2 o'clock meeting, Steve, okay?
Yeah, no, it's long gone now. But we do leasing and management for downtown. We've got a wait list a mile long for our apartments, which we are now back to being full. So it's no secret there's a housing shortage here, and people are moving downtown into our apartments. We've got over 500 units. We even do 300 Washington, which is across the street here, 214 units, and I think we hit like 97 or 98% occupancy. I'll also say I teach real estate development up at Whitman, and I have never in my 5 or 6 years of teaching have been an advocate for anything other than ground floor retail. However, I will say that I own a bunch of buildings downtown, and we've struggled to get retail. I had 5,500 square feet in my building, and we were not able to get anybody, so I had to open up a bookstore myself. That loses money. So not only do we not pay rent to the building, yeah, somebody's got to lose money. But Syracuse needed it, needed to happen.
Thanks for the bookstore.
Hey, anytime. And hopefully someday it'll start making money. But Herbston Building, for example, that's on Fayette and Walton, which is Armory Square, which obviously that has got to be a retail place. It's been vacant, I think, for over 10 years. So I've been doing retail leasing all the way back from the Bob Doucette days with Center Armory for 15 years. And ground floor leasing in Syracuse, New York is very, very tough. So I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing and your commitment to Syracuse and coming here and spending your money. We also do a lot of historic preservation. I'm a historic preservationist, and I know how hard it is to comply with all the regulations for these buildings.
Can you
And
sum up in a couple of sentences why you're speaking in favor of the application?
Yep. So that was my long-winded way of saying I know a little bit about downtown retail. And
How do you consider it being in the corridor, in the connective corridor? I feel like you see all the development happening up Genesee Street. In theory,
Yep.
we're going to tear down a highway in the middle. It's going to
Yep.
connect all the way down. That's where people should be walking back and forth.
Yep.
Zoning is supposed to pinch things to get the development you want over time.
Yep.
So how do you weigh all that? You're in the most
Yeah.
critical corridor in the whole city.
No, I agree, and I don't disagree with anything that you're saying, and I've been an advocate for ground floor retail, vibrant streetscapes. However, in the location that this building is in, I am okay with ground floor retail, and we've done it in a few other buildings. It's been successful. 712 East Fayette.
Ground floor residential.
You said retail.
Sorry, ground floor residential. We've done in other buildings and has been successful. I think that getting a commercial tenant in this location would be very, very difficult. So the last thing I want is for this building to sit here vacant for another 20 years. I've never advocated for ground floor residential, but I think the location of this building And these guys coming in and spending their money in our town, I would like to see this building happen and come back to life. Worst case scenario, they say, doesn't make sense. Without historic tax credits, they definitely would not be doing this project. And we want them to continue to spend their money in our town. So therefore, I'm in favor of this project and ground floor residential, which I believe is the first time that I've ever said that in my life.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Anybody else wish to speak in favor of the application? Anybody want to speak against the application? Hearing none, we will deliberate on this case. Is there a motion?
For the standards.
There are, here, they go, they're here, that's their
On page 7D.
D, and then, yes, I mean, that'll get you there.
Okay. Yeah, back here. Reasonable rate of return.
Did you make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Go ahead.
Will there be a reasonable rate of return? Is this the only way of getting a reasonable rate of return? I'm usually very tough on this issue, but I am reluctantly convinced that this is the only way to get a reasonable return. Unique circumstances, it's the historic building, and it's the location, it's the city, it's the time when so many commercial spaces downtown are vacant. I walk by that building 2 or 3 times a week, in fact, and for years I've been walking by those 2 vacant buildings. Neighborhood character, it has not been good for the neighborhood for them to be vacant, and I think bringing residential use into the building will be a positive development. Self-created hardship, it is not because these 2 buildings are historic buildings, and there are limits to what can be done to the exterior. There are limits to what the buildings are like inherently, and that's why I am.
Again, I neglected to go to seeker.
Yeah.
This item is going to
Okay, so we don't have to do it. Fine. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I agree with what Michael said. And like we've heard, the renting downtown is very difficult for commercial buildings, and for this to take place as a residential project makes sense.
I would say for each criteria, there is a rationale in favor of approving this. I respect what Tim has said, and he may have something more to say on it, but when I hear that a building is vacant for all these years and has a pool, and all that's, the factors to deal with, and I agree with this, the person in favor, Steve, but I forgot his name. Okay. That it's truly unique and meets the other aspects as well. I mean, I'm just thinking it's a good project, and we always need the housing. So that thought I'd throw that in.
I just want to note for the record and going forward, while this is a unique case and I'm inclined to approve it, that we have only been under rezone for the better part of 6 or 7 months now. Having been on the other side of development in the city, the old zoning ordinance was a 100% limiting factor in the ability for restaurants and other retail establishments to open across the footprint of the city. And going forward, we should see an ease of development that was not inhibited before. I think that was many portions of the intent of rezone. So
What would the historic aspect interfere with that?
No, I mean, I think there's a combination of factors here. In this case, I'm inclined, but I think on a go forward, this board should consider the intent of rezone to ease development, particularly for those commercial uses that we saw a lot of variances that were required before because they were just simply unpracticable under the old ordinance.
This was the exception, the MX5.
Right, because MX5 is the downtown commercial core. It should have active first floor retail, walkability, et cetera. So in this case, I'm just saying on a go forward where there is a requirement for commercial and ground floor retail, we should be thinking about how the time and the energy that has gone into the rezone and the effects on development that should see play out over the next months and years is going to be a real consideration.
Is the constraint of the historic status like such that they couldn't do anything else with the space? Like, given that,
I think it'd be really hard to develop that into a usable office or commercial space. I agree that.
like, it's not like they're restricted and they wouldn't be able to like.
It doesn't seem to be.
I think the pool is an issue, like.
Just the spaces themselves, the way they're laid out, they're not going to be really conducive to other commercial uses that aren't particularly like single-person offices. So it's tough. They're just weird building.
They are weird buildings. Yeah.
Any other comments? You vote your conscience. Anything else? All those in favor of approving the variance say aye. Aye. All those against it say no.
No.
Okay, it passes 5-1. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Yeah. Good luck. We still have another case.
The last item on the agenda today is also an area variance. This is due to not meeting the required two-story minimum for a one-story structure that's being proposed at 210 Hamilton Street, property owned by 315 Development, Zone District MX3.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Joe Cavender, QPK Design, 450 South Salina Street. Here with me today is Stephen Case, owner of 315 Development as well, to answer any questions I may not be able to. Thank you. We were before the Site Planning Board last week, the Planning Commission, excuse me, where we received a conditional site plan approval for this project pending the two-story minimum required relief for a drive-through and pickup-only Starbucks coffee shop. The total height of the building is such that it may appear 2 stories with the rooftop unit screening and logo and massing that takes the shape of the screening. And the site in total area is just shy of 20,000 square feet. This building itself is 16,000 square feet. The existing site contained 2 one-story, actually 3 one-story buildings, a cafe, a burn dairy, and a community center.
Question, I don't know for you or for staff, but what is the height difference between 1-story and 2-story? What's the height of this building? I'm sorry, I'm looking for it, but I didn't know if you just knew faster.
Sure, the total height to the top of the RTU screening units is 19 feet 10 inches.
So the code itself only addresses that it's 2 stories. So, obviously you can't have a non-compliant, building constructed that way. But yeah, it doesn't address a specific measurement under our purview.
But a habitable second story.
Yeah, we wouldn't permit something that wouldn't meet code. So yes.
Are there restrictions on what the second floor would be used for?
Not outside of what the land use or, allowances are.
Okay, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
We interrupted you. Keep going, I'm sorry.
This prototype is dictated by corporate Starbucks leadership as well, and something we cannot vary, understanding the intention of the board to see 2 stories there would make it very difficult for this project to proceed if it had to have a second story, and it would also, frankly, be a waste of time, energy, and material. Understanding the area variance test sheet here, it is consistent with the community character. There are 7 buildings around it that are 1 story. Feasible alternatives, really not permitted by Starbucks. The sustainability, again, I think it fits the community character, and the second story isn't required. Although, again, it appears like there is one. For future development and redevelopment of this area, should second-story buildings appear, this may not appear out of character. I don't believe there will be an adverse effect on the community, neighborhood, or environment. And the self-created difficulty, it may be, but given we started this site plan review process before rezone took effect, we are asking for some relief to the change mid-approval process for this project.
What is the I'll ask staff, what's the rationale for a requirement for a two-story building?
So that was put in the, regulations for that zone district, two-story minimum.
You don't know why?
It's mixed-use development, residential on
Oh,
the
so they're
first
looking
floor.
for a residential and whatever, but.
And housing above.
That's an
it's-
absolute requirement.
I think the clarification you might need is that habitable space, and you may know this, but we have a lot of different definitions now in rezone. But habitable space doesn't mean that it has to be lived in. It just has to meet certain building code requirements for height and ventilation. So.
Could be an office up there,
They
a
could have an
Starbucks office.
They could have
let's say.
storage. I mean, habitable means a human could occupy it, so it can't be 3 feet tall. So.
And heated.
So that's a-
That's the definition of story.
That's the
So their second
definition.
story could be completely empty if it met the height requirement for,
So there is a definition. Again, there's no measurement numbers. So a story is defined in the zoning ordinance as the portion of a building intended for human occupancy included between the upper surface of a floor and the upper surface of the floor next, above, or the roof.
and occupancy doesn't mean sleeping there. It means that a human could move around in it.
They could have a desk and work there, or
They
they could store things up
It
there.
doesn't say there has to be a human. What it's saying is that the metric for gauging what is a story is that Tim can stand up in there, okay?
I mean, you're defining it.
That is
Mike
the-
gave the only rationale that possibly that they want to open the possibility of residential and first floor commercial. And if they allow just the one stories, they're not gonna get that. And that's the best you can make of it.
We're trying to get away from sprawl-type development, which is big parking lots, one-story buildings, and drive-throughs.
Sorry, what was the resolution at Planning Commission?
It was conditionally approved pending,
Pending this.
yes.
Is this the future of Starbucks, fewer stores where people can sit down and more drive-throughs?
That I cannot specifically answer, but for this area, they see it as a benefit to the community in that particular property.
Is there a pickup inside? I couldn't tell when I read the materials. There's definitely the drive-through, and then you can also go in. And you
Correct.
Grab it, there's just no seating.
Correct.
But you can't sit. You can grab it and walk out.
Right.
No, sit down. Drive-through and a walk-through.
You can like walk in and pick up.
You have to work on your laptop there.
Right, okay.
The Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand why, and I have an idea of that. Other questions?
So this project is totally limited by the cooperation to this design.
Correct.
It's like a very car-centric intersection.
I think also just apropos to what you guys were just saying, for the record, you were asking if it's residential, and your comments should be able to be heard by the whole public, not
Yeah,
between
okay.
one
Yeah,
another.
that's
So, one of you, and it doesn't matter who, said, is it residential? And the other person said, sort of, but it doesn't matter what the layout is right now. The zone district for this parcel is MX3. So what rezone intended is that it be mixed use. So whatever is contained in that MX3 district is intended to be mixed use for all the uses allowed in MX3. So that could change the color of the neighborhood eventually. But that's what was
You happen to know if
approved
there's a
as part
bus
of
stop
rezoning.
nearby?
There is on West Genesee Street.
The implication I've understood of mixed use is some are residential, part residential, whatever.
yeah.
This puts an extra use in the neighborhood, but I don't know if that's a proper rationalization.
Sure,
This
yeah,
adds something to
Every
the
building
neighborhood.
doesn't have to be a mixed-use building, it's just a district. I mean, I think this is all new for us, right, in rezone. So mixed use means you're allowed to do mixed uses within a building, but you're not required to do it mixed. So you could have just a residential, you could have just a commercial, you could have a mix. That's the beauty of mixed uses. It opens it up to allow a variety of uses and configurations.
Would you say that the requirement for 2 stories is to encourage greater density?
Well, specifically from the code, it's intended to allow for greater vertical or horizontal mixing of uses, but MX3 is a mixed-use transitional district, so, you're factoring in residential development, but also compatible, non-residential development or commercial. Part of our analysis in the packet is, despite not having the 2 stories, our review and analysis of this, that it does support commercial use on that collector street in that district, and that it's also compatible with other 1-story buildings directly adjacent to the north and the west. So again, the intent is to allow for it, to allow for greater vertical uses and taller buildings and a range of different types of buildings in this mixed-use kind of transitional zone. But again, as they pointed out, like this is a vacant parcel with 3 vacant structures on it, as well. So all things to consider, but I believe that's what the intent is, just to allow for that, that sort of height in this area, but mixing in and being compatible with adjacent properties.
I don't want to keep interrupting you guys, but I think this is an example of some of the growing pains with rezone. We're applying these new standards for the first time to a unique proposal, which in fact required an unlisted use determination because we don't have a primary use that is a drive-through, and this is a drive-through.
Well, that's not accurate.
Oh,
So,
it's not? I'm sorry.
no, the land use is exactly what's defined in the code as a beverage cafe. It fits that to the T. So,
I thought there was a drive-through allowance.
so the land use is classified as beverage cafe.
I think it may be, well, I'm not going to do that now. Not until there's a motion.
Okay. Is there, are there other questions?
Well, I assume Professor Case is going to speak in favor, but I am interested in hearing, because obviously, it's hard to say you can't do a 1-story thing there when everything around it's 1 story, but also in relation to the development over time, how do you, and it looks way better, right? The buildings there are awful. They have all tar. You make it green, it's hard to want to say no to any of it. And I like Starbucks personally. I know it's not always, might be
You
controversial.
sure you want to be on the record on that?
Look at that faded cup right there. That's serious use. But how do you actually get mixed-use development if you don't pinch
Yeah,
people?
before you answer, are you part of this project?
Yes, I'm the owner.
Yes, you're the owner. Okay.
Steve
thank you.
Case, 155
Fine.
Xavier
I just want
Circle.
to make sure, because I didn't ask for.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, so the only thing I do want to mention, so I bought this property actually from the church probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Wanted to do exactly what rezone is basically asking for. Density, ground floor retail. I had a whole concept to put commercial uses, retail, coffee on the ground floor, apartments up top. Unfortunately, after getting the design, construction costs back, I'm not able to get the rents that I can get in downtown Syracuse on Tip Hill. And even if I could, it still would not make the numbers work. So I was unable to make the project work 3 or 4 years ago, and construction costs have just gone up since. Obviously, I've been working on the Starbucks deal for the last 3 years. And it's something where I thought it'd be a great use for the community. It's an eyesore right now. The bingo hall that's there is deteriorating. The bricks are falling off of it. The Quick Cup went out during COVID. They couldn't make it. I even offered to not have them pay rent all during COVID, and she still couldn't make ends meet. And then obviously the Burn Dairy moved to their new location down the street. So they've been vacant for a number of years. And as Jake knows, we tried to get some temporary cash flow over the last few years and had some less than desirable tenants. So I think that this is a very good way to clean up this corner. I do believe in continuing the character of the flow of the neighborhood. So if we were surrounded by 2, 3, 4-story buildings, I would agree that ours should match. But I think this fits well with the neighborhood because we are mixed in. We've got the OIP, Colonial Laundromat across the street, Brooklyn Pickle, the car shop. They're all 1 story. So we're kind of mixed in this 1 story. Even Peter Coleman's house up the street was a ranch. But I do think that this is a really good fit. And even with the height that we're getting, even though it's 1 story, we're still almost getting 20 feet out of it. So it almost, if it's for the look of the character of the building, I think we're satisfying the 2-story requirement just by the mere height of the building. But I think that, you know, we've gone a long way with the Starbucks to try to get them to bend, and they're very strict on what they want. So even if we said, hey, can you put an office above it, they would shoot it down. And this is the project that we got with them, and I think it's going to be very good for the neighborhood.
What if you said, we'd like to put a table or 2 in for people to sit down? Would they shoot that down too?
They did.
They
Yep,
did
that was
shoot
the
that
original
down.
concept, and this is a newer design. So it's drive-through and pickup only. So they're trying this new concept throughout the country, and this is one of the first ones that they're trying here. I would have preferred it to been dine-in.
How about the Starbucks franchise?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak in favor of the project? Is there anybody here who wishes to speak against the project? Hearing none? Again, I'll ask our seeker.
So it's not required for you.
Oh,
It's
okay.
already been to planning commission.
Oh, it has, okay. Fine. Then I'm going to ask for a motion on the variance.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance.
Is there a second?
I'll second Tim.
You have to go through the criteria, the finding of facts.
the criteria.
Yeah, maybe you could put it in.
Here, this one's easier. On the right side.
Will this have an undesirable change on the neighborhood? No, I don't think so. It looks very clearly a substantial improvement over the Tarvia and vacant buildings that are there. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue. I think the developer spoke a bit about how the financing doesn't work to put the residential above, given the cost ratio between the new construction and the rents. I don't personally think it's that substantial, given the context of the area. Most of them are all 1 story around it anyways. Will it have an adverse effect? No, it seems like an improvement. Alleged difficulty, this is self-created. I think he's working within the constraints that he has to get a development there that's good for the neighborhood.
Anything more on that? Laura?
Nope, I would just add, in weighing the factors that we need to consider and looking at the MX3 intent for a walkable neighborhood with supporting commercial uses and transit opportunities, that the benefit to the neighborhood and any other factors we have to think about are outweighed by the alignment with MX3 and the lack of other opportunities for feasible development.
Any other comments?
I'd say it's clearly not what MX3 hoped to see. but we are dealing with realities, and this is better than leaving the site vacant.
All those in favor of approving the variance, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? Okay. It's unanimous. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.